that Amanda was involved in during the 7-hour trip from Dubai to London, seizing control of the aircraft in the last segment of the previous episode. As we approached this conclusion, it left a lot of questions. But the solution to the primary one was that the hijackers had no idea who she was, and they decided to land the plane in a more susceptible neighborhood because did Kai make it off the plane safely? And did Edgar and John escape punishment? Buckle up your seatbelts, since there will, as I offer you the ending of Hid Poppy Episode 7 Explained. Please be aware that this video contains spoilers. If you like the video, please hit the subscribe button. This entire episode focused on the last hour of the plane's journey to Heathrow. But it turned out that Heathrow was not the plane's final destination. Instead, Amanda, who we later learned was named Amanda, took control of the plane lane after the previous episode's events because her daughter was being held hostage by the OCG. She was targeted because she had piloting experience and was in the Navy. She was doing this because the closer it got to central London, the more she wanted to land the jet there. The likelihood of a crash increased with the size of the city, which ultimately resulted that Kingdom Airways' stock price would continue to decline. This was significant because it turned out that the primary driver behind the hijacking at the time, when we first assumed it was to free Edgar and John from prison. Yet despite that, a minor factor, the main reason this agreement was carried out was that they struck a deal that essentially bet on the stock price falling, something they were successful in achieving, and in which they made a ton of money. One of the first passengers we encountered in episode 1 who was looking out for them when he was racing behind schedule to get to the plane, which strengthens the case for why he was so panicked, because his family would have been devastated if he hadn't made it onto the plane. A fatality because the hijacking wouldn't have even occurred at all. The stock price had dropped to an exceedingly low level, and Edgar was prepared to cash out. Amanda was waiting for a text message from Edgar to indicate that it was time for her to land the plane. But Edgar just wasn't messaging. His eyes were elsewhere, was holding out more and more, wanting to rinse it as much as possible despite being too huge. Having previously made a lot of money, and with Edgar being who he was, we noticed John getting frustrated. Edgar was ultimately slain by something that was Sam's abilities to negotiate with people and persuade them to change their minds came into play when they stole Amanda's phone and learned about her daughter. He used her as a way of penetrating her mind and persuading her to let him into the cockpit so that he could take control of the plane. As soon as they realized that none of the hijackers knew who Amanda was, the passengers started retaking the aircraft and tying up the hijackers. Did ultimately agree to do the stress that was created before this because they were unaware of Amanda, and there were 2 RAF jets around the plane ready to shoot a landing space that wasn't long enough and yet posed risks. Everyone was also calling their families at this point. With family members, it was stated that although it might have gone either way, the plane made a successful landing. Even though they were enveloped in flames, they were all able to escape unharmed, and the hijackers were all killed. Even the Home Secretary had assured Amanda that she wouldn't be detained for anything. When the strain subsided, we witnessed an additional extra that Stuart was that she had done to the pilot. While it was tense, I did feel like it was a bit unnecessary, especially with the cheesy line at the end. It's something that Oni would say. He locked Sam in there, where they had one final face-off against each other. Just like how this whole thing started, have starred in an 80s movie. But I suppose it worked because as the show ended, there was no need for a continuation. Following that, the characters' lives only went on as usual. Air traffic control on a location in the UK. Outside of this main arm of the story, there was the sidearm where Alice went to pick up her kid from school, and the boss told everyone, "Great work, but we've got a lot more to do," demonstrating that life moved on and that their day went on as usual. The 2 cleaners are holding a part of the clay hostage. Reflection: actually, I don't think this was necessary. Really, it didn't. When Kai left, it didn't advance the plot in any way or create any suspense or tension. It seemed like the most improbable thing he could have in the room. I would argue that the swift takedown by Daniel and the team when they opened the door and vacated the premises was probably the best thing that could have potentially been done at that time, especially given that he was aware of the threats that were present, and, of course, he was captured and held prisoner. Good to watch because it was so fluid. The suggestion that Kai would ride his bike home was likewise he was using an exercise bike at home in episode 1. So it was a clever move. Daniel was warned that he was in danger, but he eventually survived, and in general, I liked this season, especially the show's finale, which was the most tense episode we had the entire time. I think it was a fantastic episode since Daniel and Kaya's friendship appeared to have grown stronger. To consume it before the season finale, there was some, but I'm not sure if it was just me. When the aircraft began to descend, something that was incredibly emotional came to mind. Landed, I was still unsure of their survival and thought the show might. The stakes were still so high that, when combined with everyone's reactions and the soundtrack that was behind it, it created something that just invoked emotions in both me and, I imagine, many others. I'm sure other viewers felt the same way about this episode. I didn't want it to end, because I didn't really expect to experience that level of anxiety and tension while watching it. Wish to stop witnessing the passengers on the plane overwhelm the hijackers. The moment when they were made helpless by the plane was also fantastic to behold. But the satisfaction was fleeting because of the bigger thread, so it definitely brought confused emotions. Idris Elba impressed me greatly in this. His final episode encapsulated all of his performances. There was never a time when his performance wavered throughout the entire season, questioned or thought it wasn't quite there. It was just your feeling. Idris Elba, acting in a typical Idris Elba manner. Neil is in as well. Stand out for me in this play as well. I believe he's a fantastic performer and should be in more high-profile productions. The final face-off between Sam and Stuart at the conclusion was a bit of a letdown, though, in my opinion, a little unnecessary. But I can see why it was done to give them one last chance. Despite the fact that they spent a lot of time alone with each other, it still seemed like they were together. An overall fine-tuned tiny shoe. I would say that I enjoyed this program. A program that allows you to sense things and keeps you guessing continually. What will happen next? The perfect moment for the climax in the 5th episode, right before the season finale, is when you want the show to reach its climax. I've told a few people I know about this show, and I think it has the power to attract viewers just by word of mouth. People seem to realize how excellent it is, and that it is the conclusion that is all there is to it. I think it was a good limited series, considering there will be a 2nd season. This concludes Kidnapping Episode 7, Description 15 End. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who watches Breakdown on the channel for the show every week. Please subscribe so you don't miss out on any future crashes. How do you feel about the conclusion? Add a comment below. Also remember to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you later.